as I was making my way down here, sort of mutterings were going on that there was too much consensus in the room and everybody was getting along too well. So I'm hoping possibly this panel might mix things up a bit. The title of the panel is Tackling Tomorrow's Challenges Today. The session is designed to stimulate discussion about three challenges facing all of us in this room. Social media gambling, and we have Heather Wardle here, multi-operator self-exclusion, and we have Simo Dragicevic, and then highlighting the sources of help for problem gamblers, we have Professor Peter Collins. We also have a wealth of experience and knowledge in the room that was obvious from working my way through the delegate list. So I invite you all to participate. Each speaker is going to have 5 minutes to introduce their own talk, and then it's 15 minutes of discussion. You can interact by tweeting on hashtag GamCareConference.com. I'm not checking my emails, that's why I'm trying to pick up questions from the audience. Or you can simply put your hand up.
Old-fashioned way.
I have a few questions for each speaker, but without your input, the sessions are going to be short. So short and stimulating or long and stimulating, it's your choice. We're now going to move on to whether multi-operator self-exclusion can be made a reality. And Simo is the co-founder of BetBuddy. He has a vision of helping the gaming industry executives to use business data to make better business decisions and to drive growth in a responsible manner. And he seeks to achieve this vision by delivering an integrated analytics platform. In one of the few legal cases relating to this subject involving William Hill and a Mr. Calvert, Mr. Calvert failed in his attempt to hold William Hill responsible for gambling losses after he had self-excluded. And one of the key factors was that the judge decided that if Mr. Calvert had not lost his money with William Hill, he would have just lost it somewhere else anyway. The fact that he was also facing firearms and drug charges at the time made him an unattractive claimant. So whether Mr. Calvert would have succeeded had Simo achieved his goal of enabling problem gamblers to self-exclude from all gambling licenses is a moot point, but I look forward to hearing how close he is to achieving his goal.
Okay, thank you, John. I do have some slides, so I may stand here and click through. So I do run a software company, but I'm also an active gambling researcher, and it's in that capacity that I'm here today, having worked with GamCare and the University of Salford on a project looking at multi-operator self-exclusion. And I'd like to thank Andy McLennan for inviting me to this conference today. It's a privilege to be here. And I think it's very important that the industry gets together and we have a broad range of stakeholders to discuss and debate new research and technology when it becomes available, because the usefulness and the uptake of new ideas is not always dependent upon whether they're any good or whether they work, but whether ideas diffuse and spread. And that's why it's important that we can debate these issues today. My brief today is to present the case for multi-operator self-exclusion. Quite simply, that's giving players the choice to exclude from more than one operator at the point of self-exclusion rather than with a single operator. There are three relevant pieces of context which I'll make you aware of. It was GamCare and the University of Salford who set up a knowledge transfer partnership a couple of years ago, and one of the things they were tasked to look at was the feasibility of this, and I collaborated with them on that project. If we look at the most recently regulated iGaming jurisdictions in Europe, such as Denmark and Spain, they've adopted forms of this. And recently in the UK, the DCMS Select Committee recommended to the government that a form of multi-operator self-exclusion should be adopted in the UK. And before I get into the case for it, I just want you to step back and ask yourselves whether you think that a regulatory gap is at risk of emerging or has emerged in the UK. And what I mean by that is, whereas regulations tend to remain static or incremental at best in terms of rates of change, technology is on a very steep innovation curve. And The mega trends in technology that is driving these changes are things such as social media. We've heard Heather talk about that just now. There are things like big data, cloud computing, and mobile. And these are having a profound impact on not just the gaming industry, but all industries in the world. Now, in terms of the project, what we did, we undertook a detailed assessment of multi-operator self-exclusion. So amongst many other things, what we did is we looked at the literature into self-exclusion, the peer-reviewed literature. We had very detailed discussions with the industry. Clive Hawkeswood invited us to present to the RGA's Social Responsibility Committee. We had very detailed discussions with B2C operators such as Skybet. Fiona's here today, so thank you, Fiona. And I believe Amy's back from, Amy's here today as well. She's back from maternity leave, so welcome back. Also Camelot, Laura and Julian helped us enormously as well. We also asked players what they thought about it, and we also looked at vendors in the marketplace to see what solutions existed. And, oops, excuse me, in terms of what our research concluded, we did actually believe there is a compelling case for implementing this in the UK. Self-exclusion is considered as a well-established tool for self-regulation. We came across few, if any, moral obligations with regards to giving players the choice to exclude from more than one operator. If we look towards the newly regulated iGaming jurisdictions, I mentioned Spain and Denmark that have adopted forms of it. Other jurisdictions such as in North America, I think in Ontario, they'll be launching iGaming next year, and they'll be integrating their land-based and iGaming self-exclusion technology and processes. And it's also a highly scalable prevention tool. John talked earlier about CBT and how effective that is, but it's actually very hard to scale treatment, whereas with prevention tools, you can actually reach every single player in the UK for little or no incremental cost. So we came up with a very compelling case as to why we think it should be adopted. And if we look at the UK codes themselves, they are actually aligned to this. You know, they do encourage operators to encourage their players to extend their self-exclusions should they wish to other operators. But where the problem is the best practice that they recommend to do this, which currently is telling players that they can download PC blocking software to do this. And when the codes were written, this was probably absolutely the right thing to suggest. The majority of people probably did gamble on one laptop when they did their remote gambling. However, things have changed. There's been a proliferation in mobile gambling with tablets and with mobile phones. And also the industry is offering self-exclusion by gaming verticals. So this is where you as a player can exclude yourselves from, say, sports betting or poker or casino rather than a blanket self-exclusion. And these developments are here to stay, and they render PC blocking software both expensive to the player and ineffective. There are challenges to doing this. And you know what? We had a lot of detailed discussions with the industry, and they really did challenge us, and they forced us to re-examine our own assumptions around how this could and should work. But what I would say is there will always be challenges, and I don't think you can mitigate every single risk 100%. But when we did look at the challenges that were raised, we do think that they can be overcome if there's a will from regulators and industries to collaborate and work on this together. So in summary, what we plan to do is present our findings to the Gambling Commission, and if the findings and recommendations are consistent with the Gambling Commission's vision and strategy for responsible gaming, we recommend that they kickstart a pilot project in the UK. And if that is a success, then we would recommend that something is launched to cover all regulated gaming sites in the UK. And my final thoughts on this are, given that global best practice is moving in this direction, and given the technological sophistication of the gaming industry, which is by far more sophisticated than many other industries in the world, and given that consumer protection is probably the single most important thing when it comes to regulating gaming jurisdictions, my question to you is, do we have any excuses not to try? Thank you.
Simo, if I can start the ball rolling. I mean, do you think, or have you got any evidence to suggest that the unavailability of multi-operator self-exclusion acts as a deterrent to operators to self-exclude gamblers?
No, we don't have any evidence. I mean, what we do have is some research where we spoke to players. This was actually out of the University of Salford, and players indicated they thought it was a good idea to implement this. But it's a new area, and I think it touches upon Lord Sharman's earlier comments that, you know, we could probably spend the next few years trying to get a lot of research to give us a definitive yes or no whether this will be useful. But the other option is, you know, you could try and go ahead and try and do it.
But generally, is it being well received by the industry?
You know, when I've spoken with people in the industry, no one really has a moral objection with the concept. I think there were a lot of, when we started, we had some ideas on how it should work, and that, you know, operators should, for example, share data. But it was very clear early on that, you know, the onus should be on the player to make that decision. And there were also some sort of technical discussions around whether this should be, you know, a cloud-hosted solution or whether it should be in a data center run by the Gambling Commission and other trusted parties. So there are issues. I think generally people are for it. I think one of the challenges, John, is that, you know, the industry, the operators are incredibly under a lot of pressure in a very competitive market, and it's very hard for them to free up the resources to solve this problem without a gentle or more firm and sort of push or nudge from other bodies.
Okay. Do we have any questions? Yes, and I'll also be interested, question here, but I'll also be interested from hearing from any of our counsellors who have any views as to any practical experience of people seeking treatment, having the temptations placed in their way of being able to go into other operations despite having self-excluded from one place.
Yeah, first of all, I fully support what you're doing. My experience of self-exclusion isn't great. I had a problem with gambling for about 4 years. When I was 20, problem gamblers hit something called rock bottom, and when I was 20, I hit my second rock bottom. I had no money, no access to credit or anything like that. So when I tried to self-exclude, I was told to bring in a passport photo, and I literally couldn't afford to do that. And then there was other betting shops around. You know, there was about 6 near where I lived, so it was very difficult to self-exclude from all of them. And then obviously there's a high turnover of staff as well, so that's quite, you know, they don't recognise you. And so I was just wondering if there's a way that you could maybe extend it to, I know that a lot of betting shops now are introducing player tracking software, player tracking membership cards. So could you extend it to maybe covering, you know, the early warning signs of problem gambling and things like that for players who haven't self-excluded?
Yeah, no, I think that, you know, absolutely there are, you know, opportunities to do that. I think, you know, we have discussions with operators who are interested in this kind of technology. I would say it's not for everyone. Some operators see the value and benefit in it, others don't. But if the question is, can you actually intervene and put in place prevention tools before people self-exclude, I think the answer there is yes. I still think it's an emerging area, and what we need are the early adopters within the industry to really push that in and put those solutions in place and start testing and evaluating them.
Regardless of the measures put in place, do you think you would have used all your ingenuity to get into gambling premises when you were at rock bottom or close to rock bottom?
No, when I self-excluded, I really wanted it to work. I wanted no one to let me in anywhere.
But you would still go along to those premises?
Well, yeah, I'd try and get in, yeah. But I wanted no one to let me in. So I was thinking, when I had money, I don't want to go back and gamble again. So this is a good time to sort myself out, self-exclude, just so when I do have money again, I don't lose it.
And were you gambling online as well as?
Yeah, I installed something called GamCare, which worked quite well. So it was just the machines really and the bookies. But yeah, I just think that it's an impossible thing to implement without this. It's brilliant because, you know, staff have to know the players and they have to check everyone who comes in and look against the passport photo. It's impossible. Yeah. And if you've got 10 to 20 people who self-excluded, how are you going to know who they are?
Does your technology lend itself better to the online environment than the land-based environment?
Well, we developed a solution, and there is an opportunity, to upload secure data via a portal. So if you were a land-based operator and you had a list of people who'd excluded and you had their details, and if they wanted you to do that, you could do that, and they could check and use a solution as and when people come in. I mean, it's difficult if they're not registered in land-based casinos. If you don't know who the person is, it's very hard to make that check and point. In some jurisdictions globally, a lot of people do have cards and they know who those people are. I know in Ontario, for example, they've implemented facial recognition technology to stop people from re-entering because it's so difficult to stop them. And that's a new kind of technical innovation that the Canadians have launched.
I mean, Richard, you'd be confident of being able to stop people coming into your casinos across the country?
We would, from the rank group, the Grosvenor Casino, we have a membership system with photograph or ID, so it's an approach that we have always taken in our casinos, I think. So the difficulty is just that, the difference between land-based and online. Online, I think we'd all sympathise and think it's a great idea, albeit there's obviously hundreds and thousands of sites, and there's an element of a king canute. How can you actually get all of them? But with a will from the major players, that's doable. We've looked at the concept of self-exclusion nationally for land-based operations. I think in order, casinos could probably do it with a strong enough will, but there's a lot of work and effort involved in actually maintaining it. Bingo clubs could probably do it next, but when you get down to bookies and arcades, you would really struggle. Yes, you could upload the information, but the people on the ground, as the gentleman was saying there, one person in a bookmaker shop or an arcade is not going to be able to stop people, and I think that then becomes the difficulty with people in the industry, of the concerns of the litigious world that we now live in, that people will then come in and say, I'm on your database, you should have stopped me. We get it enough as it is when everyone makes the best possible efforts. Even in the casino environment, people will try to play that particular card. And so if you're in an environment like an arcade or a bookmakers, I suspect it would always be very difficult to get that crossover.
I'm going to wrap it up there. I'm getting notes to tell me to hurry up. So just remains to thank Simo for this innovative new idea. Well, as the gambling industry watched Panorama through its fingers last week, and the rest of the country watched Coronation Street on the other channel, I couldn't help but feel an opportunity was missed to increase awareness of problem gambling services more effectively than the 4-minute recorded announcement on the end of a mobile number. And despite a very sensationalist approach to the whole issue of gambling, a very unimaginative approach to making people aware of problem gambling services, GamCare itself didn't experience any increase in calls as a result of the programme. So I'm going to hand over to one of our longest serving trustees, Peter Collins, who will now tell us how to design an effective public information campaign. And I've been promised a fiver if he keeps to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, John. Those of you who know me will know that after a long career in academia, asking me to keep to 5 minutes is a very big ask indeed, especially when the brief is to design a comprehensive program of education to prevent people from becoming problem gamblers. So I shall confine myself to asking and briefly answering 5 questions.
That's 1 minute, Peter.
You're pleased about that, are you? First one is, what are we talking about when we're talking about education and responsible gambling? Well, the definition of responsible gambling has already been given by Colin Sharman and implied by others this morning. In my judgment, responsible gambling policies and practices are those which strike the right balance between consumer choice and consumer protection. That's what we're trying to promote. And the key to doing that is to ensure that consumer choices are informed consumer choices, and that is where public awareness and education come in. So that's the first question and answer. Why are we engaging in educating people about responsible gambling? The answer to that, you'll be pleased to hear, is even shorter. Prevention is better than cure. And that is one of the reasons why GamCare is certainly hoping to expand its activities into prevention work, as well as continuing and indeed improving its activities in treatment work. Question 3, what should the content of public education about responsible gambling be? Well, I think there are two headings here. The first is to educate people about the dangers of gambling, and there are some, as everybody acknowledges, and how to avoid them, because there are ways of avoiding them, like, for example, setting yourself personal rules, budgeting for your gambling, and so on. So that's one sort of component in a public education curriculum. The other component is, what do you do if you or someone close to you gets into trouble with gambling too much? So those two things constitute the content, in my judgment, of a good education about responsible gambling. Question 4, who are we trying to educate? Well, first of all, and most generally, actual and potential problem gamblers, or indeed actual and potential gamblers, since all gamblers are potential problem gamblers, and since everybody is a potential gambler, we're trying to educate everybody about this. So that's the first category. Who are we trying to deliver this education to? First answer, everybody. Second answer, we're trying to deliver it to those professionals who are likely to come into contact with problem gamblers but not know very much about problem gambling. That is, social workers, probation officers, prison officers, teachers, and so on. There's a whole category of caring professionals or educational professionals who are likely not to know about this, perhaps the biggest category being general practitioners. So that's the second category of people we're trying to reach. The third category is those who are peculiarly vulnerable. Now, it may become possible, and John would be able to tell us about this, to actually identify people in the future who are at risk by scanning their brains, but we're not in a position to do that yet. But again, as John clearly indicated, one very obvious and major category of vulnerable people is young people. So we want specially designed programs targeted at young people, which in practice means we want a program in schools to ensure that people learn about the dangers of gambling and how to avoid them in the same way that they learn about the dangers of unsafe sex or the dangers about drink and drugs and so on, and smoking and so on. And finally, we need to deliver education of some sort to industry professionals. As has already been intimated, problem gamblers are not a huge asset to the industry. They tend to cause trouble, accuse the industry of cheating, quarrel with other customers, and above all, they never have any bloody money. So they are not the ideal industry customer. The ideal industry customer is someone who tithes religiously once a week and loses 10% of their income for 50 years. That's not a problem gambler. So we need training for industry professionals so that they can assist in dealing with this, and the industry has a huge interest in doing this so that they can enhance their reputation for delivering largely harmless entertainment in a socially responsible way, and thereby avoid increases in taxes and levies on the one hand and restrictive regulation which inhibits their ability, their freedom to trade, on the other. And finally, my fifth question is, how do we deliver education about the dangers of gambling and how to avoid them? Well, if we're targeting everybody, The best way is public service advertising, about which a lot is known. And you will not be surprised to learn that I am a big supporter of what we do in South Africa, and indeed most jurisdictions in the world, which is asking the industry to put a helpline telephone number on every advertisement for gambling which they issue. In South Africa, you may be interested to know, we did some market research on this, and we asked people the following questions. Did you know that gambling can become a problem comparable to problem drinking or alcoholism or drug addiction? Do you know where to get help? Have you ever heard of the NRGP, which stands for National Responsible Gambling Program, just so that I don't get penalized in the competition? And finally, do you know what our slogan is, which happens to be the not very brilliant slogan, winners know when to stop. Of those who were asked outside casinos, over 75% said yes to all those questions. 25% asked outside shopping malls also said yes to all those questions. And the most effective way in which they knew about those things was through industry advertising, not our own specialist advertising in local papers. So that's my views on reaching everybody. It seems to me also that there is a very strong case for having a specifically designed schools program. Again, in South Africa we have one, but there are many others around the world. Here I would suggest that the key is not to focus on gambling. Otherwise, you find two types of people. One is those who say the only thing you should teach kids about gambling is don't do it. And the industry, which is maybe asked to pay for this, which will say, but if you teach people about the dangers of gambling, they won't become our customers. So what you want to do, it seems to me, is to have a program about risk-taking generally, which again ties in with what John was saying about gambling being simply one form of everyday life decision-making. And of course you can use it to reinforce what you're teaching people about other high-risk behaviors. And finally, of course, it's important to train the industry, not in my judgment, to become sort of amateur therapists, but to know when and how to refer someone to, for example, GamCare, but also to somebody in the management of their operation who is trained to interview people, to discuss self-exclusion with them, and above all, to urge them, maybe, to consider getting treatment. Well, I hope I've kept within 5 minutes. I'm not sure whether I have.
Not quite, but it was a spread bet I had, so... you know, there may be a concern on the part of the industry that the campaign is going to would exaggerate the problem and simply create yet more of the negative headlines that they're on. I mean, how would you address that, and who's going to pay for this? We've heard from Lord Sharman that there's no money coming from government.
I would have thought the industry pays for it. I would have thought that it's quite clearly part of their general commitment to responsible gambling. I don't see that if it's done in a suitably neutral way, and it's about informed choice and sensible decision-making, I don't see that they have anything to fear.
Any questions from the audience?
Hello, I'm Elaine de Christie from the National Gaming Academy, and part of the National Gaming Academy we provide suitably trained staff to work in casinos and betting shops, and part of our training involves a qualification, and within that qualification is a unit to do with social responsibility. So with the NVQ level 2 gambling operations, we can actually train staff to be aware of people that can be affected by gambling related harm. And I'd like to share this with industry today, because there are still some parts of the industry who haven't accepted this qualification for us to deliver this as part of their business. And it is bringing staff, a new generation of staff, into the betting industry and gaming industry, whereby they understand how gambling-related harm does affect people and how to spot it. And as you were talking about, we are training future employees to recognise this.
Well, I think, you know, the industry wouldn't have had some of the trouble, wouldn't have faced some of the criticisms in the Panorama programme if it had a much clearer policy about what training it does and doesn't expect its staff to be able to, to undergo, and what responses it can expect its staff to be able to make when they come across someone who is clearly exhibiting the signs of gambling too much.
All right. We've overrun on time, so apologies for that, but my fault. There've been some very good questions coming through on Twitter from Ian Semmel and Julian Price and Mike Kenward, amongst others. And I'm going to encourage our panelists to respond on Twitter if they can. In the case of Heather Wardle, that'll come from a different name that you might not recognise. But I would, before we hand over to our CEO to tell you about the future outlook, I'd like a round of applause for the panelists today.